Alleluia, 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 Alleluia. John said, "One mightier than I is coming. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and with fire." Alleluia, Alleluia, Alleluia. The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
Reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
The people were filled with expectation, and all were asking in their hearts whether John might be the Christ. John answered them all, saying, "I am baptizing you with water, but one mightier than I is coming. I am not worthy to loosen the thongs of his sandals. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire." After all the people had been baptized, and Jesus also had been baptized and was praying, heaven was opened, and the Holy Spirit descended upon him in bodily form, like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my beloved Son. With you I am well pleased." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
There's no more Advent wreath, and the manger scene is gone, and yet it feels still as though there is a little bit of Advent or Christmas lingering with us on this feast of the baptism of the Lord. If one had just woken up after several months of sleep, one might wonder whether, in fact, we had just forgotten to put out the Advent wreath, and it is, in fact, still Advent, considering the readings we hear today, considering the fact that we are on Jordan's bank, back on Jordan's bank, John the Baptist, and hearing from the prophet Isaiah telling us of comfort for my people. The very same words that we heard only a few short weeks ago as we were preparing for the coming of the Lord, for the appearance of God, for whom we were out, as the reading says today, precisely to prepare ourselves for the mountains to be laid low and for the valleys to be filled in, for our highway to be made for our God. It is exactly these highways that lead us now not simply to Bethlehem, and not straight away to Jerusalem, but by a sort of detour, rather to the River Jordan, out to the historic entryway of the chosen people into the Promised Land. When Joshua, the original Joshua, himself was leading the people at the end of their journey through the desert, out of their slavery in Egypt. He led them across the River Jordan as a kind of type, or as a kind of anticipation of the salvation God would bring his people through baptism. And in that case, it was the Ark of the Covenant, which was brought into the river, was hoisted by the priests who themselves went into the river and stood in the river, holding the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, the one place where God would become totally present to his people in the form of cloud and of fire. In this act, the priests holding the Ark of the Covenant stopped the River Jordan and made a path through this river for all of the Hebrew people, the children of Israel, to pass through into the Promised Land with dry foot. And in this, we have both a kind of anticipation of baptism as well as a kind of incomplete anticipation, an incomplete story about the baptism of the Lord. The priests, in this case, in the Ark of the Covenant, are brought into the river but are not touched by the river. They're not touched by the water. The water itself is a kind of symbol of death. And to be submerged in water was to, in some way, whether by disease or whether simply by suffocation, to sort of take onto oneself the powers of death, and more often than not to succumb to them. The presence of waters, or rather the way that God brings about life in the Bible, is not by bringing forth water into the earth, as our modern cosmology would tell us is the cause of life. And while there's great truth to the necessity of water for life, in the Bible it is not so much the bringing forth of water that brings life as the separation of the waters. The separation of the waters of the sky, above the sky, from those of the earth. And creating this space in which life can be brought forth. Life both in the sky in the form of birds, as well as life in the sea in the form of fish, as well as the life that exists between these two spheres. The animals themselves, as well as man. God's act of creation, brothers and sisters, is not about sort of watering his plants, but rather of rending backwards, rending apart the chaotic forces of destruction and of death, which are represented by the waters. And God himself, we're told in the psalm today, has built his palace upon the waters. He himself remains untouched by death. The children of Israel were being brought into the promised land, were being escorted, so to speak, into the promised land, but without having to undergo death. And they, in their conquest of the promised land, a land that had been built up for them, as God tells them repeatedly, and that he would deliver over to them without them hardly having to do a thing, except to follow his orders, to follow his commands, and to do what he told them as a sign of the great things that would come to fulfillment in the sending of his Son. The Israelites do not, in this sense, have to undergo death in order to enter into their promised land. But the opposite is also true. The reverse is also true. That the sort of promised land that they enter into is not the sort of promised land that one enters into through death. It is a lesser sort of promised land. It is a lesser sort of fulfillment. It is a fulfillment which can only be a sign of something that is greater, something that God is holding out for his people. And this sign is one that he inaugurates today, as we said in the hymn, as prophet, priest, and king. Since it is his anointing by the Holy Spirit that outwardly proclaims his kingship, his rightful kingship over Israel, in fulfillment of God's promise to his servant David, that a son, the fruit of your body, would sit upon your throne. He stands here in the place of the prophets, not only the prophet John the Baptist, but Elijah, who himself lived in this very same place where John was baptizing, and had his cave not very far away, a cave that perhaps John the Baptist himself inhabited. However, more than both of these in this moment, inaugurates the priesthood, the royal priesthood that is his by right. The priesthood in which all other priesthoods subsist, all other priesthoods find their fulfillment. The priesthood which perfectly unites both victim and priest. And Jesus in this moment begins the offering of his life, the self-oblation, the submission of himself to death and to the powers of death, humbly, willingly, obedient to the will of the Father for precisely this. Here in sign, in a sacrament, so to speak, of what will take place definitively on Good Friday outside the walls of Jerusalem. It is in this way, brothers and sisters, that we have been anticipating the coming of the Lord, that we've been anticipating the coming of Christ. Not simply that God should appear among us in the flesh. A story that has, as many internet atheists will point out to you today, that has proliferated through many religions around the world. that God himself can take any form he likes, and perhaps multiple forms as he likes, and simply appear among us, but never be one with us. It is God who takes flesh, who not only takes flesh, but also establishes his mission as a mission headed towards death. That God himself would unite himself with his people so much that he would become one with them in the sort of death that they are destined to die, as well as the sort of death that he desires them to die, so that their death may become a true source of life, a source of eternal life. It is this, brothers and sisters, that we celebrate today, the baptism of the Lord. It is this, we can say truly, that we've been preparing for, not only in the season of Advent, but even more in the season of Christmas. We don't like to think often of celebration as itself a kind of preparation, but yet that is exactly what we do. In all of our feasts, in all of our celebrations, in all of the fanfare of the feasts of the church throughout the year, these are not ends in themselves. These are celebrations which point beyond themselves, point to an eternal feast, an eternal celebration, which by celebrating it now, here, mindfully, in love, in the charity towards the members both of our family as well as those outside our family, we come to prepare ourselves to be the family of God for eternity in heaven. The family which today is revealed to us not only as Father and Son, but also as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Brothers and sisters, this voice that thunders from heaven, the voice of the Father, is rarely heard in the Gospel. But when it is always pointing to the same thing. It is pointing to not so much a word that will now, as a kind of formula, bring about a creation as he did in the very beginning. Bring about a creation as a word upon the waters that brings things into being in this world, that shapes chaos into order and into reality. This word which he speaks is now united to our nature. It is not simply the creative force of our nature. The Word himself has become flesh and dwelt among us. And not only dwelt among us, not only come to sort of snap a photo with us and then be gone, to remind us that he was here with us, and that we can be gratified that God visited his people once, sometime in the distant past. God has come among us and has made his dwelling with us, to be united with us, not only in death, but also in his resurrection, and in establishing for himself, as the means of salvation until the end of time, his church, his body, the means of sanctification through his sacraments until the end of time. We are the members of that body, brothers and sisters. And it is in this body that Jesus himself hears the voice of the Father. You are my beloved Son. With you